Welcome back, everyone, to an RFL special investigation, Surveillance Nation. Now, internet search giant Google, they recently had to pay a $22.5 million fine to the Federal Trade Commission to settle a serious privacy violation. According to the FTC, Google willfully overrode the do not track privacy settings on people who are using Safari. That's a type of internet browser to search the web. Google, they've admitted no wrongdoing in the settlement. But one thing Google has always admitted to is collecting your data. Now I'm talking about everything, including what you search for, your email, your documents, spreadsheets, pictures, even your voicemail. Now believe it or not, Google, they know just about everything about you. So the million-dollar question then becomes, what are they using it for? 2/3 of all internet searches worldwide, close to 2 billion a day, begin right here in this tiny search box. From sports scores to song lyrics and medical diagnoses, the hilarious to the dangerous and even possibly deadly. You may not realize it, but your search queries can say a lot about you and even exposing the places you visit. Every minute of every day, people turn to Google, treating it like a doctor, a shrink, a wife, or a priest, typing out deeply personal aspects of their lives. When asked if it was a good thing that users place so much trust in the search engine, Executive Chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, shocked web users when he said the following.
I think judgment matters. If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
The reality is that search engines, including Google, retain information from users' search queries forever. Google privacy policy is disclosed on the website, and it states that after 18 months, the search info you enter is anonymized so that they can't track it back to you. But legal scholars argue if you combine the anonymized data with other data, you can still develop a profile to identify users. And joining us for more on the issue from the Forbes newsroom in New York City is Bruce Uppen. Bruce is a managing editor and contributor at Forbes. Bruce, thanks a lot for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Rich.
First of all, using Google here for our conversation, you can't really exaggerate the success of the company. Just give an idea to the audience, the scope and the reach here of the firm that we're talking about.
So Google, depending on who you ask, handles about 80% to 90% of all searches in the U.S. Their Gmail is close to being #1 in share in email. It's free. They have Google Voice. They have the second biggest social network with Google+. It's fast growing. There's no end to where we touch Google every day.
Now, we're going to be speaking to the Federal Trade Commission shortly, Bruce, but as they say, for a company the scope of Google, $22.5 million is a rounding number. Talk about what the fine was for, and also talk about what kind of window it opened up to how the company operates, and also how transparent or not that they've been.
So Google figured out how to get around a little software trick that would allow Safari to track where users went on the web, which is what all advertising companies want to do. They want to compile your surfing history to get a better picture of what kind of ads to give you. So when Google was discovered to have done that, and it had been kind of an open secret on the web, they admitted it, but in the investigation that ensued, it became clear that it was a pretty established procedure at the company. It just shows that Google will come up with ways, if it needs to get around another company's browser's privacy policy.
The consumer is all but ceded that, under this new reality of the 21st century, they're not going to have privacy. Do you think that that's a conscious reality on the part of the consumer, or do you think, they might just not want to know or just don't know?
Most people live a life of inertia that unless something bad happens to them, they don't change their habits. There's a huge spectrum of people. The people who are really after Google, who their most vocal critics, are serious privacy nuts, who care and think that the world is out to get them. Most people know or don't know that, or most people assume that they're not.
Bruce, thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now I'm very curious to get the perspective of our next guest, Andrew Luper. Andrew is an attorney practicing technology law in New York, teaching classes in technology, privacy, and antitrust law. And of course, all opinions you're going to hear from Andrew are expressed here are his own. Well, I'll pick up from where he left off. Is it just the conspiracy nuts who ought to be worried or concerned or making hay, or does it go beyond that?
Well, I think we all, as consumers, at least are entitled to understand exactly what a company like Google will do with the information that we voluntarily share. The difficulty, and the reason why the FTC took the action that it did with respect to the case that you mentioned, is because the only contract, so to speak, that we have with Google is in what's called the privacy policy. It happened that what the privacy policy said is not what Google did. And this is why the enforcements are taking place, because the companies that are receiving the information, we don't really know what they're doing with them, but what they're willing to tell us that they're doing is actually not fully explained and sometimes incorrect.
If at home I want to do a search, and Google's profiting from my consumership because they're selling ads here to every user like myself, why shouldn't I have an expectation, by their policy, by the way, and also society's expectation here, that they won't take my information, and I shouldn't have to trust their goodwill, that my information won't be used, even if it's for targeted advertising? Why shouldn't I have the expectation that I didn't sign up for that? Yeah. And it's not like if you don't do anything wrong, you've got nothing to worry about kind of argument. I'll decide what you can use my information for. Why isn't that in my purview, not theirs?
Yeah, mostly because they are a service provider, and it is your decision to use them or not. You have very little leverage or bargaining power with an entity like Google, right? You're just one possible user. I believe their answer to you will be, if you're not comfortable, don't use our service. You can't really negotiate your own privacy policy because the entity, Google, says, this is what we want to do. If you want to use our service, you're signing up for it.
I'll politically editorialize for a moment, but it's interesting to me, the ones that are so concerned about the growth and the size of government are the very ones who are willing to turn over the same said government, basically unfettered authorities. In the advent of the Patriot Act, and what people, I know you know, but not everyone realizes, from the Admiral Poindexter bright ideas of the Total Information Awareness Act here, the national security letters, which are still legal, I'm not so sure the public fully grasps where we are. And now you add on top of that the exciting things of new technology and the instantaneous that you can absorb this by. I would just love if we had a national debate with all the facts on the table where the public would fall down. I'm not sure the answer, but I know they don't know the facts.
Well, now that you've raised the Patriot Act, let me say this. A lot of people say that the Patriot Act is, was a knee-jerk reaction to 9/11. Based upon an understanding of the Fourth Amendment, there is a balance, okay, in the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says that an individual has a right to be secure, and there will not be any unreasonable searches and seizures. But the balance there is we want to empower law enforcement to protect us because we want security.
Exactly, but you know that there are limits to the powers of law enforcement, and one of those limits is you have to show probable cause. You have to get a warrant. You have to do certain things. That doesn't apply across the board, especially when dealing with the federal government, if they deem you, even with zero evidence, to be a person of interest.
One of the things that is argued here is that if an individual can use a technology, law enforcement can use a technology too.
Sure.
Right? We don't want to have a defendant saying, well, you know, you wiretapped my house, right, and you followed all the rules, but you shouldn't have wiretapped my house. Well, it's a long time ago that it became clear the government is allowed to wiretap your house provided that it fulfills certain procedures. Okay? You can also access, and I think your viewers should know this, law enforcement can also access your email. They have to fulfill certain requirements, but the Patriot Act permits that.
There are requirements.
I
guess my final question to you is the law and technology. I've spoken to a lot of folks who say, frankly, the law hasn't caught up with the new modern realities. Is that a fair statement?
It's absolutely fair, but I would say it's also trying. It leads us to this conclusion. If you don't want to be tracked and you're really insecure,
live under a rock.
Well, live under a rock, or don't use a lot of the services that would make you vulnerable to such searching.
And also obsolete in the 21st century.
Well, it could happen as well, yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. When we come back, everyone, we will hear from the regulators themselves, Federal Trade Commission. You're going to find out what they have been keeping a close eye on when it comes to, yes, your privacy. And in the meantime, please send me a tweet with your thoughts on the subject, or go to Facebook and tell us what you have to say at our page about living in a surveillance nation. Stay with us.